Based loosely on a true story, Machinal was written by Sophie Treadwell. The play was produced in 1928 on Broadway. The Broadway version included Clark Gable and Dick Rowe and ran for 91 performances. Then, in 1931, it ran on the West End, although it there received mixed critiques. It then toured around Russian provinces, where it was the most popular. In 1954, a TV episode of Machinal was produced. Machinal is based on the real-life case of Ruth Snyder murdering her husband with the help of her lover, Judd Gray. They killed Snyder's husband by hitting him with a weight from a window sash, stuffing chloroform-soaked cotton up his nose, and strangling him with a picture frame wire. In January of 1928, both were sentenced to the electric chair. Well, how was the play shaped by the context in which it was written? Treadwell grew up in a home where her parents, of which her father was a lawyer, were separated, although never officially divorced. You see elements of this show up in the play, in the Joneses' unhappy marriage, as well as a reputable knowledge of law in this show. The inability of her mother to divorce her father greatly troubled Treadwell, where we see the same in Machinal, where the character young woman sees murdering her husband as the only way to be truly free of him. Divorce is never even an option for her, as it was illegal at the time. She found success as a journalist, as well as her undercover work to take a closer look at the systems in place in the U.S., making her a pioneer in female journalism. Many of her plays reflect this, as she quickly became a champion of women's representation. Many of her plays are inspired by her own life experiences. Machinal took shape because Sophie Treadwell actually attended the trial of Ruth Snyder and Judd Gray on the murdering of her husband, and made a lot of enemies due to her empathy toward Ruth Snyder. She was working at this time in a male-dominated industry, being one of the few successful female journalists, as well as the large majority of successful playwrights at the time being men. She was an early feminist, which is reflected in all her works, and they are still often seen as progressive, but especially so for the time in which they were written. As a journalist, Sophie Treadwell was also the only credited woman to travel to cover World War I. She was all about being bold and progressive. She traveled to France while it was happening. She was also the only foreign journalist to interview Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa. This could have had a large impact on the lover in Machinal and the connection to Mexico in the play. She interviewed Pancho Villa in 1921, 7 years after his victory in 1914.